In this video, I'm going to give you some tips on how to improve your IELTS writing performance. We're going to look at how to approach Task 1 of both the IELTS General Training and Academic Writing tests, and even have a model answer for you to learn from. Let's start with General Training. Task 1 of the IELTS General Training Writing Test involves writing either a formal or informal letter according to the instructions given in the task question. Let's take a look at the informal letter, which is generally written for a close friend or family member. This question is typical of the informal letter task in the first part of the IELTS General Training Test. You should spend about 20 minutes on this task. You should write at least 150 words. So, you have just been offered a place on a short training course in a small seaside town where a friend of yours is living. Write a letter to your friend. In your letter, number 1, greet your friend and tell him or her the good news about the course. Number 2, ask your friend about life in a seaside town. Number 3, arrange a time to visit your friend before you start the course. So, let's see what a model answer that would achieve a band score of 8 to 9 would look like. Dear Henry, how are you? I hope you're doing well. I have some exciting news. I've just been accepted on the hotel management training course run by your local college. It's a 3-month course which involves visiting the tourist sites in your area. That's great, of course, but what I'm most excited about is being able to spend some time with you exploring your town. I've never lived in a seaside town before, so I'm keen to find out what life is like there. I imagine the people are really friendly. But what about entertainment? What kind of things do you most like to do around town? And are there any interesting places to visit nearby? One thing's for sure, I love seafood, so I'll be spending a lot of time in the local restaurants. The only problem is, I'm so excited I can't wait to come visit you before the course starts in September. I know you usually take your holidays in July, but you might be planning to go away then. If that's the case, could you let me know of another time we can get together? Really looking forward to hearing from you. It's very important to recognize that points 1, 2, and 3 define the structure of your letter. In other words, you should write one paragraph for the subject mentioned in each bullet point and try not to mix the subjects up. Keep them separate. The paragraphs should also be roughly the same length as one another. Number 1. Greet your friend and tell him or her the good news about the course. Number 2, ask your friend about life in a seaside town. Number 3, arrange a time to visit your friend before you start the course. So, in paragraph 1, you need to do 3 things. Say hello to your friend. Give him or her the good news. And say a little bit about your course. It's important not to make your greeting too short, but to extend it a little by asking how your friend is doing, or saying you hope that all is going well. Try and be creative. There are many things you can say to make your introduction sound interesting. Similarly, when giving your good news, it's important not only to say how you feel about it, but also to show how excited you are that you'll be living in the same town as your friend for a while. It's a good idea to mention this in the last sentence of your first paragraph, because mentioning the town will introduce the place your questions will focus on in paragraph 2. You could begin paragraph 2 with a question or statement which shows you would like to know what life is like in the town. You can ask about food, the people, the things to do and see, but try not to make the paragraph too long. The model answer uses a mix of questions and statements to show your interest. In the final paragraph, your task is to try and arrange a time to visit your friend. Although you can do this by suggesting a time which is likely to be convenient, it is important to ask your friend to suggest a time that would suit him or her best. Again, the model answer gives a good example of how to do this. Now, let's take a look at the academic writing task. To achieve a good band score in Task 1 of the IELTS academic writing task, you'll need to give a good introduction and overview of a graph, map, chart, process, or diagram. Giving an overview is particularly important. If you don't provide an overview, your score will not rise above a band 5 under the criteria of task achievement. It's very important to understand this point because failing to provide an overview is by far the most common mistake test takers make in academic writing task 1. Many test takers confuse an overview with an introduction, so let's start by clearing up this misunderstanding by defining these terms in the context of this part of the IELTS test by looking at one of the most common types of diagrams used in the IELTS academic writing task 1, the line graph. An introduction in academic writing task 1 is an opening sentence which acts as a summary of what any given diagram represents. It's important to remember that in your introduction, you can't use more than 2 consecutive words, apart from prepositions, articles, numbers, and conjunctions, from the question without being penalized. This means that the same information must be expressed mainly in your own words. In other words, you need to paraphrase the first sentence of the question. Let's look at the task description of a line graph to see how this works in practice. This line graph shows the number of international students attending 2 higher education institutions in Ontario between 2000 and 2015. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. The opening sentence states, "The graph shows the number of international students attending 2 higher education institutions in Ontario between 2000 and 2015. To paraphrase the sentence successfully, knowledge of synonyms is very important, so it's a good idea to lay out 2 columns with words you need to paraphrase. This will give you the model introduction. Note that you do not have to paraphrase every word. You only have to make sure you do not repeat more than 2 main words, i.e., nouns, adjectives, or verbs in the same sequence as the question. So here, it is perfectly okay to write international students, just as it appears in the question. It should now be clear that the job of the introduction is to show what any diagram, in our case, a line graph, represents. The purpose of the overview is quite different. The job of the overview is to describe in 1, occasionally 2 sentences, the main trends or features of our graph. It should not go into any great detail, but you should emphasize the overall message the graph is telling us. So, how do you do this? You do this by looking at the beginning point of the graph on the left and the end point on the right and asking yourself, what is the difference between the information at the beginning point and the information at the end point? In our example graph, the main difference is that overall, the numbers of students attending the 2 higher education institutions in Ontario between 2000 and 2015 went up, with the biggest increase occurring among those international students attending college, shown by the blue line on the graph. This can be described as a dramatic increase, from around 300 students to 4,500. While the red line, despite a slight decrease in student numbers between 2010 and 2015, still went up considerably, from around 1,700 to 3,200. It is clear from the graph that overall the number of students attending both institutions went up during this period, with the college showing the biggest increase in student numbers. Of course, other graphs may well be giving us a different message. For example, another graph may show very little difference between its beginning and end points, or its endpoints may show a decrease overall rather than an increase. However, the principle is the same and the overall message of your overview will be defined by looking at the beginning and endpoints of any particular line graph to see what changes, if any, have taken place overall. The next question to consider is, where do I put the overview? An overview can go in one of 2 places, either in the first paragraph following the introductory sentence as shown, or in the conclusion as a final summary. The choice is yours. The only thing you have to remember is to include it in at least one of these 2 places. So, there you have it, tips that will help improve your IELTS writing score. Try putting these tips into practice every day, and visit takeielts.org/prepare to find more prep material for your IELTS test.